So in section 5, we're looking at the extranuclear inheritance, the genomes of the organelles. So some genes are not located on chromosomes in the cell nucleus, but they are in organelles. And so these genes are in the mitochondria and in the chloroplast. So the mitochondria and the chloroplast contain their own single loop of DNA, and so they have their own organelle genomes. And so they're smaller than the nuclear genome, but they're important. So you can see the nuclear genome is all the chromosomes in the nucleus, but then we have the mitochondrial chromosomes that are found both in animal and plant cells, and then the chloroplast genome that's found in the plants in plants and algae. So even though these genomes are relatively small, they contain some important proteins. And chloroplast and mitochondrial genomes are composed of a single circular DNA molecule. So it doesn't have a beginning, doesn't have an end. It's not like the linear chromosomes that we see in the nucleus. And so mammalian mitochondrial genome has 37 genes, 24 that code for the RNAs, the tRNAs, and the rRNAs that are needed for the translation of the proteins inside the mitochondrion, and 13 encode for proteins that are involved in oxidative phosphorylation, which are parts of the carrier molecules that are in the inner membrane of the mitochondria that are involved in the electron transport chain. So the chloroplast genome contains 110 to 120 genes, and they encode for proteins that are vital for photosynthesis. So the chloroplast genome in the leaf in the 4 o'clock plant, the leaf pigmentation in 4 o'clock plants does not obey the Mendel law of segregation, and this is because the pigmentation of the offspring is solely dependent on the pigmentation of the maternal plant. So if the maternal plant is green, then the offspring are going to be green. If the maternal plant is white, and then the offspring are going to be white. If the maternal plant is variegated, then the offspring are going to be variegated. So like I said, this type of inheritance is based solely on the maternal inheritance. And the reason for this is that the leaf pigmentation for this plant is based on genetically different types of chloroplasts. So chloroplasts of the 4 o'clock plants are inherited only through the cytoplasm of the egg. So when you make an egg, it has all of the organelles. And when you make a sperm during spermatogenesis, it basically cuts everything else out except the nucleus, and it's only going to donate the chromosomes from the nucleus. It does not donate any kind of genomic material from organelles. So all of the organelles come from the mother. So if you have any kind of issues with chromosomes from the mitochondria or from the chloroplast, then it's going to be inherited along maternal lines. And so there are some diseases, actually, and we'll talk about this with humans, with the mitochondria, that there may be some diseases that are now being found to be associated with not nuclear DNA, but with the genome of the mitochondria. So, but with the 4 o'clock plants, it's all about the organelles, and the organelles are only inherited from the egg, and so therefore the genes are only inherited on maternal lines. So you can see here, if you have a female that's white, all the offspring are white, even if the maternal or paternal lines are green. And reciprocal cross here, if you have green in the mother and white in the father, or whatever, the male is white and the female is green, then all the offspring are going to be green. If you have a variegated and you cross that with a male plant of pretty much any other color, you're going to end up with these various possibilities. They could be green, they could be white, they could be variegated. And then the reciprocal cross, if you do the green plant with a variegated male, then you get all green. So the point here is that really the male coloring has no effect. So you're just really looking at the female lines. The difference here is if you have a variegated female plant. And what that means is that the chloroplasts that they have sometimes are all green, sometimes the chloroplasts have green and white genes, so it's variegated, and sometimes the chloroplasts have white. And so it depends on which chloroplasts were inherited from this variegated female plant. So maternal inheritance is what we see with the extracellular or extranuclear genomes. And so in most plants, the egg provides most of the zygote cytoplasm. And chloroplasts are most often inherited via the egg. And the most common pattern, this is the most common pattern in seed-bearing plants. So there's biparental inheritance, where both the pollen and the egg contribute chloroplasts to the offspring. And then there's paternal inheritance, where only the pollen contributes these organelles. Most types of pine trees are this way. But in animals, it's all, the eggs all contain the chromosomes, and the male does not contribute any kind of organelles. But in plants, they can have both maternal, biparental inheritance and paternal inheritance. And so the way this works in the 4 o'clock plants, it's maternal. And so you can see the egg cell contains lots of different chromosomes or chloroplasts. In the one where all of the chloroplasts are green, then you're going to get green leaves. And where all the chloroplasts are white, you're going to get white leaves. And where you have variegated, some cells will have green, some cells will have white, and some will have both white and green chloroplasts. And so that's where you have variegated leaves. This is what you might get if you have this egg was produced and had all white leaves. And if you have this one, you would get all green leaves. So this is what happens with the variegated plants. So mitochondrial genomes, the maternal inheritance is the most common pattern of mitochondrial transmission in eukaryotic species. Some species do not exhibit biparental or paternal inheritance, but mutations in the mitochondrial genes can cause a variety of rare diseases. And this usually develops or affects organs and cells that require high levels of ATP, so that where they have a lot of mitochondria in those cells. So Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, this is one that can cause loss in vision, neurogenic muscular weakness, a mutation in mitochondrial gene that encodes for a subunit of mitochondrial ATP synthase, which is required for ATP synthesis, and so you get abnormal levels of abnormalities in the nervous system that affects muscles and eyes, maternal myopathy and cardiomyopathy. And so this is where you have a mutation of the mitochondrial gene that encodes for the tRNA for leucine, and the primary symptoms are muscle abnormalities, and that's mostly in the heart. And myoclonic epilepsy and ragged red muscle fibers. This is a mutation in the mitochondrial gene that encodes for the tRNA for leucine. So in our concept check for section 5, what is extranuclear inheritance? Second question is, what is an example of extranuclear inheritance? And the third question is, are these types of inheritance maternal or paternal, or could it be both? So in extranuclear inheritance, it is chromosomes in the mitochondria and the chloroplasts, which have their own DNA, which is single-stranded or double-stranded DNA, but it's a single loop of DNA, and they have their own ribosomes, and they make their own proteins. So what is an example of extranuclear inheritance? The 4 o'clock plant is actually our example, where depending on what chloroplasts are present in the female version of the plant, it is going to determine what the offspring will be. So this would be inherited along maternal lines, and it's inheritance of the chloroplast DNA, the chloroplast genome. So what are the types, are these types of inheritance maternal or paternal? So in mitochondrial, it's usually the maternal lines of inheritance. In the chloroplast, it could be in the maternal, or it could be both parents, or it could be paternal. So in the 4 o'clock plant, it happens to be maternal, and there are other, though, plants that can have paternal and or both parents showing inheritance. But the point is that these are genes that are inherited from the chloroplast or from the mitochondria. And that's the end of section 5.